This election is not over. Far from it. We have only begun the process of obtaining an accurate, honest vote count. We are fighting for the rights of all Americans who want to have faith and confidence not only in this election, but in the many elections to come.
This is President Trump's last stand. He and his campaign team are not giving up. This week, they launched legal challenges in several states in a last-ditch attempt to hold on to the White House. Given that all the major news networks, even Fox, have declared Joe Biden the winner, is Donald Trump just screaming into the wind, or does he have any chance of retaining the presidency?
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us.
President Trump may believe he won, but his great challenge now is to prove it. To prove there were illegal votes and enough of them to make a difference. This task falls to his lawyers, including Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City.
I'm giving you the big picture. There is strong evidence that this was an election that in at least 3 or 4 states and possibly 10, it was stolen.
The Trump team alleges that illegal votes were cast across the country, and especially in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona.
The Pennsylvania election was a disaster.
Trump's people allege that the illegality takes several forms. First, and perhaps most prolifically, that Republican monitors were blocked from observing the counting of mail-in votes.
Republican observers being kept so far away that they had to try to use binoculars to see the ballots. They couldn't accomplish that. And even though we went to court and we were allowed to move 6 feet closer, the Democrat machine people moved the counting place 6 feet further away.
Second, that a number of mail-in votes were allegedly fraudulently backdated to beat the deadline.
We have evidence now from not only the post office, but from others, that there was backdating.
Trump's team also alleged that ballots had been stolen and that votes had been cast using the ballots of deceased people.
You put that all together, we're up to about 900,000 votes that were completely invalid.
And Giuliani says they have dozens of witnesses who are willing to go on the record.
What I saw was disturbing, and the process seemed to be specifically so we could not observe and also so we could not challenge.
This time they mailed out the ballot and somebody took my ballot. They also took the ballot of my roommate.
Well, these sorts of statements form the backbone of the Trump lawsuits and will be considered in the state courts. They may even find their way up to the Supreme Court, where conservatives have a majority. But will they make any difference? With a record 146 million people plus voting, would it even matter if a few votes were deemed illegal? Let's go back to the map. The winning candidate has to secure a minimum of 270 electoral college votes to win. As things stand, Biden is way ahead, but his lead in some swing states is quite small. If just a few thousand votes were found to be illegal, some states could, in theory, swing to Trump, taking him to victory. But this all looks very unlikely, so much so that all the major news networks have already declared Biden the winner.
CNN projects Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th president of the United States.
NBC News now projects that Joe Biden has won the Keystone State, Pennsylvania.
Joe Biden will win Pennsylvania and Nevada, putting him over the 270 electoral votes he needs.
Breaking news at this hour. CBS News projects that Joe Biden has been elected.
Well, they're all reading from the same auto cue, but not everyone's impressed.
What was it called by? Oh my goodness, all the networks. Wow. All the networks. We have to forget about the law. Judges don't count. All the networks. All the networks thought Biden was going to win by 10%. Gee, what happened? Come on, don't be ridiculous. Networks don't get to decide elections. Courts do.
Well, classic Giuliani, very dramatic, but he is overstating the court's role just a bit. It's in fact people who decide elections, and in fact the Supreme Court's only decided an election once, back in 2000 during Bush versus Gore. But since the courts are involved this time, let's bring in our two lawyers. In Tallahassee, Florida, we have Barry Richard, who coordinated George W. Bush's legal challenges in Florida back in 2000, which ultimately won Bush the presidency. And in North Carolina, we have John Malcolm, whose article influenced Donald Trump's selection of a Supreme Court justice back in 2017. John, I'd like to start with you. Probably the more optimistic of the two here regarding President Trump's chances legally. What are his chances legally?
Oh, look, he's going to have a difficult road to hoe. By the way, I want to push back on one thing you said. I mean, ultimately, the Supreme Court decided the standards that were to be used to count ballots. It was still the people who chose George W. Bush in the year 2000. But look, in 2000, you had litigation going on in only one state while a recount was going on. Here, you have multiple lawsuits with multiple different allegations about different types of irregularities that no doubt occurred. And the president's going to have to prevail in pretty much all of those states, by showing that not only that irregularities occurred and illegal votes were cast, but it was enough to make a difference. That is a tough row to hoe. But I know that there are a lot of lawyers in all of those states working very hard trying to gather that evidence. And we'll have to see what they present when they're actually in court.
One of the things we see a lot in the mainstream media is that the Trump campaign is making unsubstantiated allegations. They say they're not unsubstantiated. They have got evidence. They've got thousands of affidavits. They've got dozens of witness statements, and they've got video and so on. Have you seen any evidence that looks strong to you?
Well, the Trump team is gathering those affidavits. They don't need to present them to me or to the press. They need to present them in a form that is recognized by a court to the court. So they're not out to persuade the court of public opinion at the moment, or at least they shouldn't be. They should be in courts of law trying to prove their case.
Barry Richard, similar line of questioning to you, really. What do you make of President Trump's campaign's chances of affecting the election outcome?
Well, given what I've seen so far, they're pretty close to zero. I agree with what John said, but the end result is that the only thing affidavits do is they get you into the courtroom. You can't win a case on affidavits. You've got to actually present the court with credible proof of fraud. I haven't seen any credible proof of fraud at this point. And with regard to the other allegations, most of them are not legally sustainable.
Right. Well, let's talk about the one in Pennsylvania, which Rudy Giuliani makes a tremendous deal of. He says that Republican election monitors were blocked from actually monitoring. They were pushed so far back from where the ballots were being counted that they couldn't really do their job, and that was against the law in Pennsylvania. Is he right?
Actually, the fact that the Trump lawyers, including Mr. Giuliani, are making that their primary position indicates the weakness of what they have. There is no basis for either legally or factually for a lawsuit based upon the poll watchers. For one thing, there's got to be a federal violation, which in this case would have to be a constitutional violation. Mm-hmm. The only constitutional issue that would come into play is equal protection, which says all voters have to be treated the same way. And that it's not equal protection of ballots, it's equal protection of people.
Right.
And that means that both sides have to be given the same observational opportunity, which as far as I can see, they were.
The Trump campaign have said that on the matter of curing ballots, people were not treated equally, that a lot of opportunity was given to Democrat voters to fix their ballots where they came a cropper in terms of administrative kind of procedure. Can you just explain what curing the ballot means, first of all, and do you believe that it was a one-sided process?
Well, in Pennsylvania, like other states, many other states, if a ballot is seen to have some technical deficiency, for instance, a mail-in ballot has no voter signature on it, then there's a specific period of time in which the election officers are to contact the voter and say, you didn't sign your ballot, you have so many hours to come in and fix it. That's what they do. The issue here, as I understand it from what I've read, is that the argument is that people who mailed in ballots had more of an opportunity to correct errors than people who voted in person. Again, that gets back to the issue that I said. Everybody had the same opportunity to vote in person or by mail. The fact that there are different procedures relating to voting by mail doesn't make it illegal or unconstitutional.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with everything that Barry said. I do understand that there are state laws that allow poll watchers to be there while the ballot count is going on. And I've talked to several people who said that when they were in the room, they were kept a minimum of 30 feet back where they couldn't observe anything. And if they left the room for any reason, even to get a drink of water or go to the bathroom, that they were not readmitted. And I also understand, but again, this isn't evidence. We'll see what they present. That different instructions were given to liberal districts and conservative districts about the parameters to be used for curing ballots, or if they could cure ballots at all. But whether this could all be recaptured via a recount, or whether it's now a done deal and there's nothing that can be done about it, that of course I don't know. The one thing it is going to do, unfortunately, is cast a doubt on this entire process, and that's not good for our country.
John, the Attorney General Bill Barr has given federal prosecutors permission to investigate if, quote, there are clear and apparently credible allegations of irregularities that, if true, could potentially impact the outcome of a federal election on an individual state. What is the significance of Bill Barr getting involved? What kind of powers do they have?
Well, look, they can engage the FBI, and they can go out and interview witnesses. A very short time period, but they can conduct a grand jury investigation and subpoena records. They can summon witnesses to the grand jury. They can do all of the investigative techniques that they would do in a normal case, although the time will be dramatically circumscribed.
Yeah. Barry, I've read in a number of, should we say, mainstream media networks that this is unusual and just another way of showing his loyalty and fealty to Donald Trump, and that it's somehow dancing on the edges of propriety. Why is that, do you think?
Well, it's not just unusual. The Justice Department has an internal procedural written rule which existed under General Barr's administration, as well as other administrations, that says that they will not conduct investigations of an election until after the election results are certified and everything is over. They've done that in order to maintain the independence of the Attorney General's office and to avoid the candidates trying to use the Justice Department to influence the results of the election. The reason that the person in charge of that particular division resigned yesterday was because he was upset about the fact that Barr said he was going to do this. But I agree with John that the Justice Department, which is what we're talking about, does have the power to conduct either a criminal or a civil investigation, so long as it's an investigation of something dealing with federal laws.
Thank you. Now, with the big US networks declaring Biden the winner, you'd be forgiven for thinking that President Trump has no support for his legal challenges, but actually his party's big names are firmly behind him.
President Trump is 100% within his rights to look into allegations of irregularities and weigh his legal options.
There's a lot of shenanigans going on here. If I were President Trump, I would take all this to court. I'd fight back. Do not concede, Mr. President. Fight hard.
This case could very easily end up at the U.S. Supreme Court. You mentioned Bush versus Gore, which I was part of representing, then Governor George W. Bush. In the course of 36 days, we had multiple cases throughout the state of Florida. It went twice to the Florida Supreme Court. It went twice to the U.S. Supreme Court. It took 36 days to resolve, and we got an answer. I would expect a similar process to play out here.
Well, is that a fair comparison by Ted Cruz there? We're going to be talking to our two lawyers in a moment, but first, a quick reminder of what happened 20 years ago.
Decision 2000, election night.
The 2000 election between Al Gore and George W. Bush came down to just one state, Florida. Based on exit polls, U.S. networks called the state early for Gore.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column. This is a state both campaigns desperately wanted to win.
But hours later, they lost their nerve.
What the networks give us, the networks take it away. NBC News is now taking Florida out of Vice President Gore's column and putting it back in the too close to call column.
Later still, with around 85% of votes counted, they handed Florida and the election to Bush.
George Bush is the president-elect of the United States. He has won the state of Florida, according to our projections. 25 electoral votes.
Remarkably, Gore picked up the phone to Bush and privately conceded the election, but then did a U-turn, and just hours later, the networks flip-flopped yet again.
We have made the decision to move the state of Florida from the Bush column to the too close to call.
It was in fact so close it triggered an automatic statewide machine recount, which put Bush in front by a mere 327 votes. But Gore didn't give up, requested a manual recount of a number of key Florida counties. And this is when we learned about Chads. Hanging Chads, dimpled Chads, and even pregnant Chads quickly became buzzwords of late 2000. But what are they?
Do you have an hour? I can explain it.
Well, we don't have an hour, so here's the basics. Some Florida counties used a punch card voting system. Voters punched the hole next to the candidate they wanted. The Chad was the little bit of paper you punched out, except in some cases it didn't quite come out and it was left hanging.
It's slightly detached.
Or in some cases there was just an impression left. Well, this caused all manner of legal troubles, with counties struggling to uniformly decide what actually counted as a vote. Ultimately, after an imperfect manual recount, Bush was found to be 537 votes ahead, and he declared victory on November 26th.
After a count, a recount, and yet another manual recount, Secretary Cheney and I are honored and humbled to have won the state of Florida, which gives us the needed electoral votes to win the election.
They thought it was all over, but they were wrong. With nothing left to lose, Gore demanded a manual check of all spoiled ballots in the state of Florida, and the state Supreme Court agreed. Bush's team appealed, and the case ended up at the U.S. Supreme Court. The court acknowledged there were flaws in Florida's voting system, but decided there wasn't time to remedy the situation before the state was legally obliged to cast its votes for president, along with the other 49 states. And that was it. George Bush officially became president-elect 36 days after the election. Back up to Barry Richard now. Barry, if anyone knows about this case, it's you. Do you think that Ted Cruz is right when he said they had their day in court, President Trump deserves his?
Well, with respect to that statement, he is, of course, right, because the right to go to court for redress is as fundamental a right as the right to vote. But there are vast differences between what was happening in 2000 and what's happening today. In 2000, the problem was related to defective ballot design, and everybody acknowledged that. The ballots were, thousands of ballots were being kicked out by the reading machines, and those ballots were being kicked out because of the Chads. The problem, so far as the U.S. Supreme Court was concerned, is that the states had different, and even the counties had different standards for the hand recount. So one county would say, we're going to count a ballot if any portion of the Chad continues to be attached, and another county would say it's got to be attached all around. So the result was that in Broward County, at a very liberal standard for hand counting, they resurrected ballots that had been rejected by the machine at a rate 60 times greater than Palm Beach County. And that ultimately is what persuaded the U.S. Supreme Court. They said the people in Broward County are having more rights, more influence, more power in their vote than the people in Palm Beach County, and that was a legitimate equal protection violation.
Thank you. Now, we heard earlier in the show that a number of top Republican senators are throwing their weight behind President Trump, and so are some of the 72 million people who voted for him.
The results are fake. They're not real. They're not real. They may say they are, but they're not.
Stop the Steal began as a Facebook group created by Women for America First and managed by Amy Kramer, who's associated with the Tea Party movement. It was reportedly gaining 1,000 new members every 10 seconds and hit 300,000 members before Facebook removed the group on November the 5th for being, quote, organized around the delegitimization of the election process. Let's introduce our final guest now. And Suzanne Monk is a Trump supporter and a sort of a member of the Stop the Steal group in her own way. Suzanne, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Just quickly, what is it your group wants? What are they concerned about?
Well, we are concerned that our elections here in the United States be conducted fairly and legally. We want to make sure that every vote is counted, every vote is verified, and we want to make sure the legal process is followed. And we're not going to stand down until that is the case.
The networks have already called it for Joe Biden, and they've also said that such claims by the Trump campaign are unsubstantiated. Where do you get the evidence from to make such claims?
Well, there's ample evidence, and there's ample cases going on right now. Actually, there is a case in Pennsylvania preventing the mail-in ballots from being included in the ones that were taken those 3 days after the extension. There's a case in the Supreme Court in that already. The Pennsylvania results cannot be called because of the injunction by the Supreme Court right now. So there's a lot of legal ground to cover still before we get to the actual certified results. As many people who were here in 2000 know, Al Gore was the projected winner for 37 days before George W. Bush actually became the president of the United States.
Facebook has taken the group down because they say that it was trying to delegitimize the election process. What do you make of that?
Well, I would say that the media has delegitimized the election process by actually trying to call the race for Joe Biden when, in fact, the results do not meet that result. Pennsylvania cannot be called. Arizona is still being counted. The idea that we would project Joe Biden as the winner when, in fact, there are all of these votes that have not been counted and legal issues that have not been resolved is highly irresponsible. I think it's far more likely that the media is not accepting the process, and we would like the process to unfold as is intended by the Constitution.
If the local courts, state courts, or even indeed the Supreme Court eventually say that the result stands and that Biden is the president-elect, will your group accept that?
I think many in America, many patriots and Trump supporters will accept that. We are not the radical left. We don't burn things down when elections don't go our way. We believe in the process and the rule of law. So yes, if it can be confirmed by the courts, and I'm assuming the Supreme Court, as many cases are going to end up there, that these issues were in fact resolved, sure, we'll accept the results, but we're not going to accept the results when none of that work has been done and we still have many legal issues being resolved, and in fact, evidence of massive, widespread voter fraud across the country.
I don't think, just between our two lawyers, do you think that that last statement holds water, evidence of massive and widespread voter fraud?
I don't think either of us knows. The Trump campaign team is gathering evidence, and they're not presenting that evidence to us, and they shouldn't. They're there to present it in a court of law. Commenting just on a couple of the things that we just heard. Look, Facebook does not have a lot of credibility, I think, in this area, which is why the leaders of Facebook and Twitter and Google are all being hauled up to the Senate to answer questions about their bias. And look, after the 2000 election, very, very few Democrats believed in the legitimacy of the process, and current polls show that 70% of Republicans don't believe in the legitimacy of the process. We're not a third world country. There are a lot of vulnerabilities in our system. We need to take measures to correct those vulnerabilities so that a substantial majority of Americans of both parties believe in the legitimacy of the process.
Now, you've talked about anti-conservative bias online. There is also the question of how the big networks are handling this now. You can see all of them, including the formerly loyal Fox, are now cutting away from President Trump whenever he makes a statement about the election. Let's have a quick listen to the soundbite here.
If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly, but a lot of votes came in late. I've already decisively won many critical states, including massive victories in Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio.
Okay,
name just
here
a
we
few.
are again in the unusual position of not only interrupting the President of the United States, but correcting the President of the United States.
Suzanne, I imagine you'd make the argument that the country deserves to hear from the President, whether he's right or wrong.
I believe the country does deserve to hear from their president, regardless of which party he's from, regardless of whether or not the news media approve of his job. That is not their decision. They are there to report. If we're going to cut off the president for lying, we should have been doing that for the last 40, 50 years.
Barry Richard, John Malcolm, and Suzanne Monk, thank you all for being with us on The Nexus today. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this or any of our previous episodes, do check out our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week, then, goodbye.